All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be an awesome podcast today. I'm really excited about this one. Right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Tom Barrett. Tom, it is an honor to have you in the studio today. I don't want to ruin your introduction, so I'm going to actually turn it over to you. And I would just, for the audience that does not know you, how would you introduce yourself? What's your background and, what's the story?
Sure, and thank you again so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I'm Tom Barrett, state senator. I represent Michigan's 24th Senate District right now. But really, my background's in the Army, 22-year Army veteran, just retired earlier this year, and I'm running for the United States Congress here in this district. And we have 119 days to go till the election, and it's going to be a spirited race all the way through the finish line.
So I don't know if you've seen any of my episodes, but the general way that I start these is I want to kind of know about the man that you are first, and then we'll get into your ideologies and things like this. So were you born and raised here in Michigan? Where were you?
Yeah.
Where did you grow up, and what were the things that were influential to you as a child that shaped the man that you are today?
Sure. I grew up here in Michigan, in southeast Michigan, in Madison Heights, suburban community outside of Detroit. I'm one of 7 kids, so grew up in a big household. And my parents, were pretty strict with us and also pretty frugal because we have a big family. And that really did shape a lot of my upbringing and my mindset about things, the things that I look at and the values that I learned from my parents. And really, I'm the third oldest. I'm also the oldest boy in my family. So I have 2 older sisters, and then there's me. I have a younger brother, 2 younger sisters, and then another younger brother. So we kind of had a sibling pair growing up, each of us. And then my youngest brother was kind of born like 6 years later after my youngest sister. So we're all about 2 years apart. All have a sibling pair, and then my youngest brother. But really, as I grew up, right when I graduated high school, I really didn't know what direction to take in my life. I was really unsure of, what to do in college. That sort of was the natural, next step to take in life, but I really didn't know what to do in college. I didn't feel quite ready for it, and I didn't really have a lot of skills to go into the workforce, so I was contemplating what I would do next. And I thought the Army would be a good idea because I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to do something patriotic and useful and productive, but also I knew that the Army could afford me some opportunities that I wouldn't otherwise have. So I decided to join the Army. I signed my contract 2 days before Christmas, my senior year of high school, and they had to delay my departure for about 6 months until I actually graduated, the following June. And about 2 weeks after I graduated high school, got on the very first airplane ride of my life and flew to basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And that just totally changed the trajectory of my life from then on. And it's been the greatest adventure of my life.
I can't wait to dig into that part of your story because I'm sure that was like a shock because you go from just being a young boy in the world trying to figure out your trajectory to being you're in this whole integrated brotherhood program that holds strict standards and helps you grow as a human being. Right before we get into the military service, I want to talk about, you had quickly mentioned there or alluded to the fact that you had strict parents. And I tend to find that when you're a child, that sometimes is a little bit like, why are my parents so rough on me?
Yeah.
But generally it's an extremely formative thing that is good for the character development of a young child. Would you say that you grew up in a good home, and when you reflect back, that was like a big part of your moral compass and who you are today?
Absolutely. And my parents are still, we still go visit my parents. They come to our house, and I said my parents, were strict. They had to be. We're a big family, but they also had a lot of real moral, foundational, right and wrong beliefs. And in society today, we see this shift away from a belief in right and wrong into this area of, no offense, everything's a shade of gray, right? So
very good reference.
Yeah.
There.
So there are no, black and white contrasts anymore. Everything is just sort of this moral relativism. And it's like, no, if something is wrong, it stands the test of time of being wrong. And if something is right, it stands the test of time of being right, regardless of the circumstance that you place it in. And that was something that I did really learn. I think the biggest takeaway from my childhood was that foundational belief in a right and wrong. And that's something that, without even expressly or explicitly teaching us that was the example that my parents really put forward. And, growing up with siblings in the house, we all fought like hell all the time and everything. But now we still, like on group text, we'll still tease each other and everything else, but we're really close and, we all get along really well. A lot of my siblings will come out. We just did the 4th of July parade in Brighton, and I think, probably 4 or 5 of my siblings were there, each with their kids as well. And, they're participatory and they help us out a lot, and we have a lot of fun together now.
So there was a lot of love in your childhood and in your story. It sounds like there's a lot of respect. There's a lot of, real camaraderie in your family. That's important because there's a lot of broken homes. There's a lot of broken families. Yeah. And I can already tell the reason you have some of the confidence and the ability to have a stance that you do is because you have that strong foundation. You were taught right from wrong. You came up in a good family that knew that those things exist. When you started to allude to the fact that nowadays there's this kind of like sometimes this my truth movement, and that's kind of that's bothered me a lot, to be honest, because there is the truth that we should seek to attain as a healthy population, right? And we should be able to sort right from wrong, right? If we can't objectively say what is good and bad or what is right from wrong, how do we have any direction at all? That's like being in a car and having no sense of how you get to your destination.
Right.
The things that guide us along our way are moral compasses, values, knowing good from evil, being able to admit when we messed up. So I think the search for the truth in the things which I'm hearing in your story has almost made you the perfect candidate to represent people, because we need someone seeking the truth, not creating a version of reality that you're living in that maybe we are very disconnected from. I want to know that my representative is searching for what is best for the overall people. Right.
No, and you're exactly right. And so often in politics and really in life in general, but, as a piece of it in politics and in our self-governed experiment that we're still doing as a society and as a country, people forget that this is the exception to the rule of human history, not as we understand it in our own vantage point. We think this is how it's always been. Our unique system of government and this representative democracy and rights for people who oppose, what the government is doing, that right to free speech, right to protest, voice your opposition. I mean, you can't do that in Russia or China or plenty of other places around the world. And historically in human history, you couldn't do it anywhere. And in America, we embrace that. And we actually respect people who we vehemently disagree with because they stand up and voice their opinion. And that's something that we universally have respect for in almost every circumstance. And that's, really uniquely American. But, in politics, in government, I remind people our founders, they tasked us with forming a more perfect union, not a perfect union. We're never going to achieve perfect. We are a government made up of men and women that are inherently imperfect, and you have to meld together people's distinct and different interests and life experience and life, shaping, experiences that they've had that ultimately shape their worldview, and try and get them into something that satisfies a majority of people in the room to, support or oppose a particular idea. So, we have to be honest and sincere. We're never going to get to perfect. That's an unreasonable standard. But we ought to at least be seeking that truth that you're pointing out. And we should not have a disagreement, or at least not a wide disagreement, as to what that truth of the matter is. And that's increasingly becoming more of the argument in the room is, what is the truth, not where do we go with this information?
That is an incredible summary of not only American history, but what we should be striving for as people. The idea of a more perfect union is so beautiful because our idea of perfect changes over time. What was considered perfect in the 1900s is not what we consider perfect today, but it is the striving. It is the searching for the more perfect that is the beauty, right? And I love how you alluded to the American experiment. We came from strong men. We came from a group of strong people that stood in defiance of what was the law, of what was considered right at the time, and said, no, listen, there's a better way to do this, that we can provide for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right. And throughout time, when we were growing up, you're a little bit older than I am. I'm 34. How old are you, Tom?
41.
Okay, you're a little bit older than I am, but even when I was growing up, the American spirit was incredibly strong. There was a lot of patriotism in the country. People had the American spirit. They valued the country, and they valued the ideals that we held sacred, right? Over time, I've witnessed a shift in that. And a lot of the times it may come down to education or the way that the information is presented. Because even with my fighters, I recently had a group of people over my house on Saturday, my fight team. And just for fun, at some point, I was asking them about their amendment rights. Hey, Hayden, tell me what your Third Amendment right is. Tell me what your Fifth Amendment right is. And almost none of them, not one person could name each part of the First Amendment. Not a single person. And that is really shocking to me, because we came from this land of, we all grew up in, the current generation might be experiencing something different, but we grew up in an America where we really valued the American dream. And that's changing. And in my opinion, we need to get back to the fundamentals. We need to get back to the basics. And we need to go back to what made this country great. Why is this country the land of opportunity? Why was I able to go from the ground up into being a successful business owner who was able to be a professional fighter? Well, it's because the foundation of the nation. It's not my skin color. It's not my belief system. It could be being a good human being versus being an evil one. Right. But we need to get back to these things. So even hearing these words in the conversation, I can tell that you understand that if we don't seek direction like this, things will continue to slip further off course.
Right. And eventually, the further it slips, the less people feel willing to defend or embrace America to protect this society and this culture that we have. And if that continues for too long, you hit that point at which people are just indifferent to America. And I can't think of a worse outcome of this caretaker obligation we have for the time that we are voting age, and the time that we are the ones taking up the mantle of leading our communities all the way up to leading this nation. And if we don't, if we're not adequate caretakers, what's going to happen for what we leave behind for the next generation? I have 4 little kids at home, and I am every day more concerned about what America will look like when they're my age. And Ronald Reagan actually, in one of his very early speeches, before he was even a candidate for office, gave a speech, I think it was called A Time for Choosing, and it was about the presidential election in 1964. And it was, I think, the very first political speech that he gave. And he talked about in there a man that I believe had escaped from Cuba and came to the United States, and he was retelling the story, and he said that these men, hearing of this man coming to America, were like, wow, how lucky we are to live in America. And the man said, not how lucky you are, how lucky I am. I had a place to escape to. If we lose freedom, liberty, and all of these values, these foundational pillars of our society, if we lose them here, there's nowhere else to go. There is nowhere to escape to after this. We are the best country in the world, and we have to act like it, and we have to defend those things, and we have to defend them aggressively at times, because there is no other place to go.
Absolutely. America is the light to many places around the world. We are a beacon of hope and a beacon of freedom. I've traveled all around to many different countries. I've been to the favelas of Brazil. I've been to Brazil many times. I've been to China many times. I've been to many parts of the world where the living conditions are subhuman. Some of the things I witnessed in China, I wouldn't believe to be real if someone just told me the story. And these people, the people that I befriended in Brazil and people that I spoke to in China, they look at America as the land of opportunity. If there was any way that they could move their family and their loved ones to our country, they would do it because of the idea of America. If they were to witness some of the internal struggles, they would be the first ones. Like Master Perez is a phenomenal example of a gentleman that escaped different parts of Mexico City crime. He's been stabbed. He's been all kind of things. He came to America. He was able to launch a business, provide for a beautiful family. His daughter grew up to be a doctor, and he is one of the most patriotic American men I know. And he was born in Mexico City. But he said, listen, I knew America represented a dream a vision, a place where I could actually be given opportunity. And I'm living proof that it does exist.
Right.
I had to come over and do things the right way. I had to learn to be a good human being. I had to network with people that could help me along my journey. But I was able to embrace the idea of America and grow. And I think we need to protect that more than anything else.
Yeah.
Your story is exactly reflective of the story that Master Perez has lived in his life.
And I think people forget that, freedom, it doesn't just mean the freedom to succeed. It means freedom to take a risk, freedom to fail, freedom to pick yourself back up and continue to go forward. And what the government does over time is we seem to take away this idea of the freedom of failure because we're so now risk averse as a society that no one wants to take that risk. And the government and the bureaucracy and the layers of everything just crush that human spirit. And then people don't ever lead up to or achieve their full potential because they're afraid to take that next, uncertain step on that path, and they don't know what that's going to be like. And that's a hard thing to overcome. You've got to get a little bit comfortable with a little bit of risk in your life to take that next step and to really be successful. And the world is certainly made up of great examples of people who took great risk to achieve great things. And I just feel like we're taking that away from people by limiting their potential, by continuing to just give them barely enough to eke by, that they never actually get out of that cycle of dependency and go on to achieve great things for themselves.
I don't think you could have hit the nail more on the head if you tried. And the crazy thing is, a lot of the times those ideologies are based in a positive emotion. It's almost like the Freudian mother that's trying to overly protect her child. That's like, yeah, but I don't want you to experience failure. I
Right.
just want love and happiness and
Right.
success. Well, character and real, fortitude in yourself comes from failure.
Oh, absolutely.
Resiliency. The things that we admire the most in people are people that have struggled and failed and found out what it is like to not be a winner.
Yeah.
Because then by failing and coming up short, you reevaluate your shortcomings. You step up. You might increase your work ethic. You might increase, your intelligence in a subject matter. You're going to go all in. I know exactly what you're speaking on, and it leads to a good example across culture recently is like there are no winners in the game that we're going to play. We're not going to keep score.
Yeah.
There are no winners. That is more detrimental to the development of powerful people than anything else. You think you're protecting people, but listen, when one team kicked the ball in the goal 30 times and the other did 2, they clearly know who won, and they
Right.
knew who the better people were. So the idea that it's like, well, no, you're all winners. Well, then that says you don't need to evaluate why you are not as good as this person. You don't have to put more work in. You're all winners already. That is detrimental to the progress of people. So I see these type of ideologies, and I understand that it's someone just trying to protect people. But what they don't realize is you're actually damaging or weakening the people that you are trying to protect.
Right.
Just like the Freudian mother.
Right. It's like that. There's a famous quote, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for. And it's the same thing with our kids, with everybody else. Like, you have to go out and live your life, and you got to live your potential. And you can't do it in bubble wrap. You can't insulate your kids. I mean, we want to protect our kids, definitely protect their innocence, their childhood, all of these things, but we don't want to insulate them from, realities of life and the accountability that comes with it and the growing up. I mean, this is how you have 35-year-old men living in their mom's basement their whole life because they never take that, they never get pushed out of the nest to fly for the first time.
That is so incredibly wild that you just said that, because in my brain I thought in the natural world, the bird pushes the limit. Hey, you've got to go and fly.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm safe here. Food comes to me. You do all the work. You bring it. I'm happy. I don't need to go anywhere. But you are living a fraction of the life that you deserve and the life that will then yield a better future for the people that come after you. 100%. The final statement I want to talk about on this, or that I'm going to make before I would love to shift to your Army story or your military service, is you mentioned a moment ago about indifference in people. And I think one of the most important things that we need to embrace as a society now, because everybody knows that things are kind of on a teetering point and we need to turn them around, right? The indifference of good men is one of the worst things that can happen throughout human history, through any event. The only way that atrocities can happen and madness can take place is when good people that absolutely know right from wrong, that know what we should be doing, are indifferent or silent. Either one, right? In Dante's Inferno, they reference the fact the silence of good people is like the seventh circle of hell, right? We need our people in our communities to seek out the representation that truly embodies what we know to be right as a cultural group and say, we are going to support those people to the end because it is needed now more than ever.
Right. And you have to be bold, and you have to be willing to be bold, and you have to know that people are going to disagree with you. And you don't go out looking to confront people just for no reason, but you also know that you have to have confidence in your position. You're not the only one that thinks the way you do. There are other people that have the same general, belief system that you do, the same general political ideology that you do, the same frustration of government bureaucracy or the culture at large right now. All of those things are felt by many, many other people. And, they talked about it when Richard Nixon was president, that silent majority that, they didn't know, the media didn't realize people felt this way. And then Richard Nixon wins in a landslide, and they kind of dubbed it as the silent majority. And I look at it, part of it too, just in the culture, your political activists, particularly on the more liberal side, they have a machine that they use to, integrate into all of these places that they try and position themselves. For a lot of conservatives, they're busy, running a business, raising a family, getting kids shuffled back and forth to their after-school activities. They are in their own space, controlling what they can control, their little slice of society, their family, their household, their kids, their grandkids. All of those things are what they are really focused on. And in the background of all that, you've got these activists that are trying to undermine every little piece of their life. And then one day they kind of realize what's happening, and they're like, how did this happen? Well, it's been going on for decades. And it's not a bad thing to be focused on your household, your kids, your life, and the responsibilities you have. But we also need to open our eyes to the other things that are going on around us.
For every one of my listeners, every one of my supporters, every one of the people that know this academy know what I've done and what our team has done over the years, he just perfectly summarized exactly how I feel and how I am at this moment in time. I've been a person that's tried to stay out of politics as much as I can my entire life.
You're what we call a normal person.
I try to dedicate to my family. I try to dedicate to my community. I've tried to build myself into a man that's worthy of looking in the mirror and saying, like, hey, you're a good human being trying to do things the right way. This battle has been brought to me. This now, for the first time in forever, I'm going to be actively trying to get my community together to say, now is the time. Because like you said, it was almost like we were asleep at the wheel. This battle's been raging and taking place. And before, I feel like liberals and Republicans, they fought over smaller ground. They fought over more minor differences. It's gotten to the point where, especially the loudest group, the people with the megaphone that are screaming, that are appealing to the emotional mob, they are preaching an ideology or a system that is so different from what I believe to be good for, the large majority, the silent majority of people, that if we are not standing up now and against it, it'll be too late by the time you say, guys, I don't really agree with anything that's been going on. I've just been sitting silent. They're going to say, well, you should have spoken up. Now's the time to be speaking up.
Right.
So let's move into your military service. So you're a young man. You've got the American spirit. I felt it too. I really believed in this country. I grew up being like, I need to know my rights, and I love America. I love what we stand for. I love that we're the melting pot.
Right.
I love that. It led you into military service, the most patriotic thing you can do. Put yourself first, or put yourself out there in service of others before your own needs. You can stay home here and be safe. You didn't have to go and put your life on the line, but you believed in something larger than yourself, and that's very important. So let's talk about that chapter of your life. What were your expectations like going in? Then what was it really like? And then let's pull like the juice from that part of your story.
Yeah, so I started out, like I said, never had even been on an airplane. Flew to basic training just a couple weeks after I graduated high school, and go through basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And I tell the story of when I finished training, I swore I would never go back to Oklahoma again. And then 8 years later, by complete coincidence, I married an Okie. My wife grew up in Oklahoma. Her dad worked for Ford and was transferred to Michigan when she was in middle school, and we met in college later. And we go back to Oklahoma all the time. In fact, my kids are there now.
The universe had different plans for you, Tom.
It's a big country with a lot of states, and by just coincidence of life, we end up going back to Oklahoma to visit family there. And it is a beautiful state. It's a lovely place. And it turns out it is even better when you don't have 7 drill sergeants like just, breathing down your neck.
Maybe
the whole
it wasn't
time.
Oklahoma that really rubbed her on.
Right. It's like no matter what. And this is part of that rite of passage. You get off the bus and there's chaos and you're lining up and, stand here. Wherever you stand, it's the wrong spot. If you turn right, you're supposed to turn left, other way around. And, it's just very disorienting. And it feels like almost like hazing, like they're doing this out of a desire to be mean to you or to, mock you in some way or something. But you actually learn that the reason they do all of this disruptive, just immersion in what you're doing is to take you out of your comfort zone on purpose. And every generation, it feels like we're a little bit softer than the generation before us, right? I mean, you go, of course, back to the greatest generation that fought World War II, lived through the Depression and everything else, and then the baby boomers and the Gen X, the millennials, and everybody on and on. Now we've got, tablets, iPads, and cell phones, and
anxiety epidemics, and people that can't function and can't make a phone call and are terrified of everything.
You want something, you want a couch, they'll get it to you tomorrow.
Right now, baby.
100%. So online, and those are fine, in a lot of ways, but because of that, people don't get drawn out of their comfort zone very often.
And that is very psychologically damaging.
It is.
Because when you reference the greatest generation, these are people that really had to learn to endure.
They did.
They had to learn resiliency.
Yep.
They had to struggle. All the things we alluded to earlier. That's why they were so strong. It
was natural in their life. It was
a part of life. You knew that struggle was coming. So guess what? You built yourself into someone that could handle the struggle.
I served with some guys when I was deployed to Iraq, about 8 years after I even joined the Army. So I go on this deployment. I'm a squad leader by then. We've got some younger troops. Some of them, they had never even been to a funeral in their life. Their grandparents were still alive. Everyone they had ever met or knew in their life, and that's a great thing, was still living. But it is vastly different than, the generation 2 or 3 generations before them. If you were, a similar age soldier in 1942, you had dealt with some loss and grief and other things like that, which was just, it's different today. So the Army takes you out of your comfort zone. They really force that, uncomfortability on you so that when you are faced with challenges later on in a chaotic, say you're on the battlefield or something is really stressful, it's not the first time you've dealt with that level of stress and that, taking you out of your comfort zone environment. And it's not a perfect replica for, really challenging situations, but it does prepare you. And when you start when you're 18 or 19 or 20 or 21 years old and you're kind of in that stage of life where a lot of younger people join the military, it sets you up in that time, and then they build on that and build on that and build on that. So I went through basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and then went across the street from the basic training barracks to my what we call our advanced training, which is where they teach you your individual job skill. So I was a field artillery scout in the Army and the field artillery. So there's a few different jobs, of course, in the Army. You've got your infantry soldiers that are the guys on the ground, and they take and seize ground and land. And, in a conventional war, they're the guys on the front lines, going forward and seizing more territory. The artillery is kind of a little bit back, firing over top to hit targets that are, in advance of where our troops are at. And within the artillery, you've got the guys certainly that load the cannons and fire them. We call those guys the cannon cockers. And then you have people in the job that I had, which is where you are the reconnaissance or observers that find the targets, discern based on where they are geographically, where that is on a map, get a grid location of where that is on the map, relay that information back to the Fire Direction Control Center. They kind of synthesize that data into, okay, if this target is here and the guns are here, what's the trajectory of the barrel got to be, and how much, charge bags do they put in, and what kind of round do they use, and that all gets kind of figured out, and then they start launching rounds.
So you're really on the strategical side. You're really trying to set up exactly or the information necessary so that you don't hit your own troops, so
Right,
you don't miss the
right.
target.
Yeah, they frown on that.
Yeah, exactly. You're the strategical guy
Yeah.
that you had to be you had to handle precise information. You had to
Right.
relay it correctly because people's lives are on the line.
Right. Yeah, and then you do that, and you're usually integrated into your infantry unit, so that if they come under assault or under attack, you're there to call in that support, whether that's artillery support, mortars, air support, whatever. And
Everybody's seen that in the movies.
Yeah,
Someone calling in the artillery.
Yeah. So that was sort of the job that I had and what I first enlisted for. And what really surprised me is I went in without a duty assignment already given to me when I enlisted. It was, the needs of the Army. And when I first enlisted, my recruiter asked me, he's like, you did pretty well on your entrance exam. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a helicopter pilot. He's like, well, we're not sending teenagers to flight school, so either go to college, get a degree and apply then, or join the Army, get some experience, and you can apply to go to flight school when you've got some more experience in the Army and see if you even like it in the first place. So I'm like, all right, what's the shortest enlistment I can do? And he said, because I'm like, what if I don't like it? This is a big leap of faith. And he's like, we have a 2-year enlistment for this artillery position. It was like basically you could be an infantryman or an artilleryman 2 years, including your training, which was about 6 months long. So I'm like, all right, 2 years, I'll do 6 months in training. They'll send me somewhere in the United States. I'll, maybe drive home on long weekends and visit my family and, high school buddies and whatever. And so I go through my training and they send me to Korea. And I was like, very surprised by this. I'm like, I only have a year and a half left on my contract. Like, they're sending me halfway across the world. Have no context for what it's like in Korea at all. And I landed in South Korea on Christmas Eve of the year I graduated high school. So I went from high school graduation, basic training, so never on an airplane, barely outside of Michigan, and then go from there to landing in South Korea on Christmas Eve. And it was a total lifestyle change and just a world of difference. And I mistakenly thought Korea was a warm climate country. And I will tell you, I've never been more cold in my life than when I was in Korea. And we'd go out and do these training exercises, and we're out in the cold, and you're setting up a tent maybe, and you're moving it from one spot to another, and you're sleeping on the ground sometimes with no tent and just a sleeping bag. And it's chaotic. And these guys that I served with, many of them came from warmer climate states than Michigan. And they were like, Barrett, like, why are you so cold? You're from Michigan. You should be used to this. And I told them, I said, guys, listen, we have this thing we've invented in Michigan. It is wonderful. It's called the indoors. And we go there when it gets really cold outside. And like we have furnaces. Like the Army hasn't figured this out yet. Like we spend so much time outside doing training. It's the Army. You're outside. You don't do that. You don't fight the war from inside. Maybe nowadays with like drones and whatnot. But 22 years ago we're outside, and it was just so different. And the Army kind of had this trick that they pulled. An assignment in Korea was a 1 year long assignment. And so, of course, I do my 1 year. Now I'm down to 6 months left in the hourglass. And they do this thing where they're like, well, you can either re-enlist and we'll send you to a duty station back in the States. Or if you don't, you have to stay here the extra 6 months because we don't have enough time to reassign you. So going all the way back to when I enlisted, they knew that they were going to send me to Korea and put me in this box of like, do you stay in or get out? And it's like this leverage that they have over you. So it was, in retrospect, very clever of them. But at the time, I absolutely did not appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So these are probably incredibly formative years of your life. You really had to learn about being a man and being and being a part of a team and, consistency and commitment to the people around you, like massively important character development. What do you think are the most important lessons you pulled from Korea or your military service that you carry with you today?
I think just the Army has a set of values that they really instill in you from the very beginning. It spells leadership, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And each of them have a definitional meaning. And, you are expected to live up to the Army values. In fact, that's one of the things you're rated on every year is, on your evaluation report is, so-and-so lives up to the Army values, or so-and-so exemplifies the Army values. And they really talk about integrity a lot, doing the right thing even when no one's watching, and doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And it seemed to me, I as I told you, I grew up with a lot of values in my house and in my parents teaching us that. But I also remember that not everybody came to the Army in the same way that I did. And so teaching people values that exist above their own self-interest, kind of like you said, if we all just live our lives in our own selfish self-interest, it would not be a very pleasant society to live in. We all have self-interested motives in a general sense, but we don't undercut one another just to spite each other for a shortcut. Like we would have no traffic lights, right? Nobody would stop at a red light if it was all about me only. But that's no way to live. And so the Army has these values that we instill in people, and they'll, spontaneously quiz you like, Private Barrett, what are the 7 Army values? Loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, personal courage, sir. And you got to, be able to recite these and everything. And it really taught me a lot of that growing as a person responsible for myself, responsible for getting somewhere on time. We had very early mornings where we would start our day with physical training early, even before the sun comes up and all of this. And it feels like a grind, but then you kind of get into it, and you get into the stride of the routine of it all and everything, and having your duty day, having a team that relies on you, and you being a contributing member of that. And because of that 1-year cycle, we constantly had people that were about to leave, and we had new people coming in every month. So, especially the closer you get to leaving, we call it the short timers disease. You get like you're looking ahead to when you're going home, and you're less focused on your job and your task that you have. And that last month is really you out processing, turning your gear in, getting your paperwork done, and them giving you your next duty assignment and everything. So, you've got, your first month, you're just getting your feet underneath you. Your last month, you're out the door. So you've got maybe 10 months where people are there doing their actual job. And eventually I look around and I realize I'm not the newest guy anymore. Because when I first started, I was the newest guy, and you get all the real crappy assignments because you're kind of the lowest guy on the totem pole. I had to lug around the machine gun for 3 or 4 months because no one wants to carry that big hunk around. And, I talked about sleeping outside in the wintertime. You got this 16 or 18 pound machine gun, and you got to put it inside your sleeping bag at night when you're sleeping, because the Army is very particular about not losing possession of your weapon. Your weapon is your purpose in this. And if you lose possession of your weapon, you're not an effective combatant on the battlefield. It makes a lot of sense. So they really drill that into your head. We're out in the field in January or February right after I get there, and I've got this, machine gun inside my sleeping bag with me. So we're sleeping overnight. And then eventually you realize, hey, I'm not the lowest ranking, the youngest, or the newest guy. And now I have some experiences that I can help share with the guys. They might be 6 months less experienced than me, but that's a world of difference when you're right out of basic training. And I can tell them some things and help build them up a little bit. And by the time I was gone, I was really pretty proficient at a lot of these tasks that we had, because it just became a little bit more natural. And that, that's kind of a good feeling to have, to be like, wait, I'm not a nobody with no experience and nothing to offer. When you start out in basic training and you don't even know, left from right as far as which way you're supposed to go. You don't even know how to march in sequence or in step with your, other soldiers in your platoon. And it's just that progression, and that kind of follows you throughout the rest of your life. And I think that's an important thing, that you kind of build that confidence too.
And there's a beauty in the fact that they have that value system, and through difficult things over a sustained period of time, you build competence across a wide variety of skills, right? And through that skill acquisition, you're going to feel confident in who you are. It's going to build you as a man. You're going to look at the progression because you've done something that is difficult. over a sustained period, probably even when you didn't want to. You were alluding to that. Even the days you're exhausted, you can't believe you got to be somewhere at 0500, but yet you're there.
Yeah.
And you're going to give it your best.
Yeah.
And doing that over a sustained period of time makes you a very competent person.
Right.
Which then builds your confidence, which it's like once you've done really difficult things, you're willing to take on the task. You're willing to do the couple extra things around your home or in service to your country that some people might fall short of because they don't have that level of work ethic. They might not have that commitment. It's crazy to me that you're the first. I've interviewed many veterans, but you're the first veteran that laid out the values like that. And I think that is so incredibly important because if you hold yourself to a standard, it gives you something to strive for. It's like they're laying out, this is the blueprint of what an ideal serviceman looks like.
Yeah.
And you need to chase that standard. They can lay it out in front of you and you can recite it and you can know it. But the question is, are you actually working to develop yourself on your integrity, on your loyalty, on your commitment to others, right? And I think this goes all the way back to the beginning of our podcast. We need those same values in society.
Yeah.
We need values in society that we as people look at and say it is worth putting in the work to chase those values. And we're going to fall short of them. It is very difficult to be a great human being in life that is surrounded by temptation, that's surrounded by all these bad choices, bad negative influences, traumas that happen to you. But we should strive as a people to say, what does a great civilization, a great family, a great personal legacy look like? So the Army laying that out, those are incredibly important.
Right.
And I bet you it was very formative to you to be like, you know what? That is what I'm trying to embody.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are things that, as I said, people come from all different backgrounds. I had a very faith-based upbringing, but not everybody does. And that's not necessarily everybody's input into the Army. And they may not have that. So things like values, they may not be that familiar with what that even means.
And what that does is it creates alignment. It allows you to be more part of the group together. Yes, that alignment is crucial, whether it's the military or whether it's society.
Right.
So if we don't align upon good values, what are we aligned upon? Just the fact that we're living?
Right.
Well, a criminal's idea of how you should live this life is vastly different than how I want to live this life. We need to have clear values. I think this is super important in your story. And the other thing you mentioned, which I forget exactly how you articulated it, but it really sparked a good idea chain in my mind where we all have the capacity for wrong. And oftentimes, like the way you talked about, if there was no traffic lights and we could blow through, we need to realize that as people, we have the capacity to create the most brutal, terrible, monstrous society in the world. And it's all comes down to our choices.
Right.
So we have the capacity for as much evil as we have the capacity for good. That's why it's so crucial to look inward, set values, look at a strong family foundation, look at a strong society, look at strong men throughout history and women throughout history. When I say men, I mean people.
Right.
I call, guys could be a group of men and women, okay? But we should look to examples of strong people throughout history and say, why were they strong? What can we take from them? And because otherwise, what I think you're seeing a little bit in this culture is people, I know how I can phrase this perfectly. I never judge somebody on their character fully when they're at a position that's not powerful. Okay, like if somebody's low level and they're being ultra friendly to everyone and they're super kind and they put out this outward thing, that tells me a fraction about them. When someone's in a position of authority, where they have the ability to abuse other people or they have the ability to trample people's rights and then they still do the right thing, that right there is how I can tell the type of human being someone is. That only comes down to what you've been speaking to, that you have to have an incredibly strong value system. It's easy to be a good player, a good friend when you're at your entry-level job. What about when you're the governor of the state of Michigan and you could run people over. You could be a tyrant. You could do almost anything you want. And as long as your team supports you, you're probably going to be able to keep that position. But that's when I'll find out who you are.
Yep.
Because
character comes through.
Your character will be shown to the world because you have the ability to be on a spectrum from the greatest leader that we could have in this state, a governor that the people, good human beings, stand up and say, we are so proud to have that representative, or you could be a tyrant. You can say, you know what, I'm sitting on $11 million or this, that, and the other thing, and I'm going to focus only on re-election. I don't care about the average people. These things matter. And the funny thing is they come back to simplicity. They come back to values. Because if you're a good human being, truly to your core, it's very hard to corrupt you.
Right. And
you have conviction.
What I try as my own personal standard, just in elected office, is I try my best to be someone people can be proud to vote for instead of the lesser of two evils. Because so much more we see the lesser of two evils. And I'm like, look, I want to be somebody that when people go to the voting booth, they're like, you know what? I want to vote for this guy.
I know for a fact I support Tom Barrett.
I'm proud to vote for Tom Barrett. You know, these other people, and I can't speak to every person on the ballot in any particular race, but, you know, they may be less invested, or they might be like, the lesser of two evils, and how that gets thrown around now is our best case scenario as Americans, it feels like, is that we're voting for the lesser of two evils. And I don't want to do that. And I know that there are going to be people that disagree with me on X, Y, or Z issue or whatnot, but I hope that they feel like, at the very least, I have a foundation that they can respect, even if they disagree with me. I want them to be able to respect the viewpoints that I have, the thought process I put into it, and the independent, review of legislation and things and just stuff like that. And that's, what I hope to do. And, I'm sure I fall short of that at times, but it's something that it's sort of, what you asked about, the Army values, and just to sum it up kind of into the golden rule, if you will, for me as a political candidate is I want to be somebody that people can be proud to vote for, not just the lesser of two evils. Because you can win either way. You can win as the lesser of two evils, but that's not really an endorsement of you and your positions the same way as it is if people are, more embracing of your of what you're doing.
1,000%. And without naming any names, I'm going to tell you right now, I've interacted and podcasted and interviewed people that I could feel that they'd be the people that would just run a smear campaign, would try to fire up emotion, would just want to get people fired up at the opposition versus taking a stance on who they are. Versus when I sit and speak to you today, and I spoke to you for a significant period of time before we even started podcasting, the things that I feel beyond your words are authenticity, integrity, positive emotion, a trajectory about caring for the country. That to me triumphs that's what I want in a candidate. You don't feel like the gentleman's like, well, look how bad this person is, that's why you should choose me. To me, that tells me more about you than them, because I don't know if those things are true. All it tells me is you're not standing on who you are, you're standing on hopefully the opposition is worse than me. I don't feel that from you. I feel authenticity. And I think people are craving authenticity. People now more than ever, this might be why Joe Rogan is the most, powerful podcaster in the world. He's crushing media companies in ratings because he is giving you authentic, unedited dialogues where people can see a human being. We need more of this. So let's start to go into your legislative career. As you're getting out of the military, what points you towards politics? I can already see it makes perfect sense. You're a man that came from a value structure as a child, that went in the military, that found a value structure that is a part of a melting pot country, that's part of a melting pot military service. You see good people and you see values and structure. When you come back, though, the most often recited thing about politics is it's a dirty game or it's this, that, and the other thing. What made you decide to take your life in that direction?
Yeah, so I joined the Army and had served back and forth at different deployments and different stages. So I did the year and a half in Korea. Actually, 9/11 happened about halfway through my time in Korea, and that really sort of galvanized my decision to stay in the Army, because I was thinking I might get out and pursue other civilian opportunities and kind of go forward with my life. And then when 9/11 happened, I was like, all right, I'm not going to quit the Army, right after we get attacked in this way.
Your American spirit was on fire, right?
It's so devastating. We were on a training mission. We had just started this training mission when 9/11 happened, and because of the time zone difference, for me, September 11, 2001 was a day like any other. Like, we were out in the field doing training. It wasn't until the following morning on September 12th that we actually became aware of it because of that time zone difference between the United
Yeah, if you were
States
in
and
Korea, you were, 11 hours ahead? Is that
I think
correct?
it was 12 or 13, depending on daylight savings and all that stuff. But it was a half a day offset. And then we learned about what happened. And we actually thought for half of the day that this was all part of the training scenario we had begun. So we had just gone out to the field, got set up, and then we're starting this training exercise. And I mean, it wasn't until, around noon or into the afternoon that we actually were, convinced that this was not a training scenario, that America really had been attacked. And one of the guys in my unit had one of those like AA battery powered, with the telescopic antenna, like little tiny televisions. And
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're out in the middle of nowhere in Korea, kind of out in the countryside. I mean, you need a lot of space to fire artillery. You can't do that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So we're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So he turns this thing on, and it's like scanning the channels. And there's like one TV station that comes in out there, and we can't understand a word they're saying. It's of course in Korean, but it's just this reel of airplane flying into building over and over and over again, and we're like, wow. This is all of a sudden real. When I joined the Army, Bill Clinton was president. It was after the Berlin Wall came down, after the Cold War kind of ended, and there had been this drawdown of kind of our footprint around the world as well as domestically. The number of troops were being drawn down and everything else. And all of a sudden 9/11 happened, and we were like, wait a minute, this isn't a peacetime Army anymore. We had been falsely believing that this was a peaceful world and that we were just going to, do our part and have a deterrent effect as a military and whatever. But basically Bosnia, Kosovo, and Korea were the places in the world that we had troops going, and neither of which was, extremely dangerous at the time. There were certainly some, risks, especially in like Bosnia and Kosovo. They had some issues there, but not like, Iraq and Afghanistan level of things. And in Korea, it was basically a stalemate along the DMZ there that was held, with minor incursions, for, 70 years now or something. So then 9/11 happens. I decided to stay in the Army, but I wanted to transition into the part-time, into the reserve component so that I could go to college, do civilian things in my life. I'm like, the Army frustrates me doing it every day. I can't do it every single day, but I don't want to quit. So I'm going to transition into the part-time component and go to college. I came home on leave a few months before I got out, and my best friend from high school kind of reconnected with him. He's like, well, where are you going to go to college? And I thought about going to Michigan State because I had an interest in politics. It was kind of like a hobby, and I liked it a lot. And I thought I could, maybe work or get an internship at the state capitol down the street and kind of start that way. And he's like, well, I'm going to Western, and I just got an apartment off campus, and we need another roommate, and I can help introduce you to people and take you around and everything. So I decided to go to Western. And
For political science?
For political science, or as I call it, political useless. And, yeah. So my high school buddy of mine, and he also went into the Army. He went into the reserves right out of high school. His dad was a Vietnam vet. He grew up in an Army household. It was really his, destiny, if you will, to go into the Army. And I learned a lot from his dad, and we both kind of joined the Army at the same time. I move out to Kalamazoo to go to college, move in with him, and 2 weeks later, he gets deployed to Guantanamo Bay, like right after we moved in. I mean, like we haven't even unpacked all the way yet, and he gets deployed. And so all of a sudden, this kind of hook that I had to come out to Kalamazoo, a town I'd never really even been to before, and start this new life, this friend of mine is gone. And I got to start kind of finding my own way and starting over and, meeting new people and building relationships and everything. And met my wife there at Western Michigan. And as I told you, she came from Oklahoma. And we actually met in the College Republicans at Western Michigan University. So we kind of met doing political stuff together. That was a lot of fun, also a lot of frustration at times. And then my sophomore year of college, I got deployed to Guantanamo Bay. So my buddy had been there right when I started. He came back home, and then a few months later, I got deployed to Guantanamo Bay.
Your turn.
Yeah. And at the time, in 2003, of course, the war in Afghanistan was going on for a couple of years by then. And then the war in Iraq started in March of 2003. And the Army quickly exhausted all of their military police assets. They had them in Guantanamo Bay, they had them in Iraq, and they had them in Afghanistan, all doing this kind of urban security type of mission that the military police were trained for. And then they realized, they're like, well, we're not using conventional artillery a whole lot, because we're doing a lot more of that urban precision type of engagement. So they decided to take my artillery unit here in Michigan, and they cross-trained us just to do the detainee mission in Guantanamo Bay, securing the cell blocks there, moving detainees back and forth to their, recreation, to, serving them their meals, getting them to their interrogation, everything else. And they cross-trained us to do that to supplement the ranks of the military police that were there so that, basically they would have more people to help with the workload. And so we got very quickly notified. I mean, I think I had maybe 3 weeks before we left when I got actually assigned to this deployment. I had to drop some classes, take some exams early, put my stuff in storage. Like, there was a lot that went into it. Leave for this deployment, spent a year in Guantanamo Bay. I got promoted to sergeant about 15 minutes before we got on the plane to leave for Gitmo. And then I was assigned as a block sergeant. So I'm 22, and I'm in charge of a cell block in Guantanamo Bay for a year, guarding the Taliban and Al-Qaeda guys that are there. The Abu Ghraib scandal in Iraq broke open a couple of months after we got to Guantanamo Bay, so a lot of people confuse the two. Of course, Guantanamo Bay is in Cuba. Abu Ghraib is in Iraq. That detainee abuse scandal became public like 2 months into our time in Gitmo. That changed a lot of our, procedures there and everything else. I come home from that deployment. I finish college. I get deployed to Iraq for a year. I wanted, and I was about to get out of the Army. My contract was expiring. My wife and I were engaged. She was planning our wedding. All these things in my life are happening. And I'm about 3 months into my time in Iraq, and I thought about it, and I'm like, I never got a chance to go to flight school, and that's what I wanted to do when I joined the Army. So I'm going to apply to go to flight school and just see if I get in. And if I don't get in, I'll just get out, no harm, no foul, and I'll move on to the other things in my life. And if I do get in, I'll get to fly helicopters. Like, who's going to turn that down?
Win-win.
So, yeah. So I call my wife from Iraq. We're engaged at the time. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And she was supportive, but I can tell she was like a little, like, this isn't what we were planning to do at this point.
Well, she wants her dream. She wants her family.
Right.
She loves you. You've been gone a lot. It's
Right.
extremely stressful in the
2
relationship.
deployments.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm like, look, I'm probably not going to get in. Like, it's not like a slam dunk thing or anything like that. I've never flown anything but a paper airplane in my life, so whatever. Did my whole packet while I was there, took the test, had to do the flight physical, all of this while I'm on this deployment, and send in my packet, and they selected me to go to flight school when I came home, and they taught me to fly some of the most amazing, advanced helicopters in the entire world. I mean, they took me from, flying a paper airplane to flying a $25 million Black Hawk helicopter by the time I graduated. And it's like only in America, right? Those opportunities only exist here. I start from being a ground pounder grunt to flying helicopters. And I'm like, this is really kind of cool when you take it all in. And I came home from flight school. And when I came home, a whole bunch of guys I had served with, and it was mostly men that I had served with on different deployments, but men and women alike, were really struggling to find jobs in Michigan, find opportunities. And at that time, we had the second highest veteran unemployment rate in the entire country here in Michigan. And, we're coming just out of that recession that we've been in for so long, and we're not really out of it yet. The veteran unemployment rate is super high, and it historically is higher than the average, unemployment rate in the general population.
So is this like 08, 09, 2010?
Yeah, so it was 2011 that I came home from flight school.
Yeah, so that's right after the 08, 09
Yep,
recession.
Exactly. And we hadn't really ultimately come out of it.
Sure, there's a lot of
yet.
ripples.
Yes. And so very end of 2011, I graduate flight school and move back home. 2012 is when I'm kind of resuming civilian life. I'm working for the state treasurer at the time. I was an analyst there working for the state treasurer, doing the Army part-time, flying helicopters, weekends, evenings, all kinds of different times.
You got a pretty awesome life going, man.
It wasn't bad. And then anyway, so then I'm looking around and finding folks that I had served with that really were struggling. And I'm like, I can complain about it or I can try and do something about it. So I decided to run for the House of Representatives. The election was in 2014. I really made veteran issues a front cause of this because I felt like, this is the life experience that I have. We have a lot of people that come to the legislature with their own unique life experience, and that's what makes our country and our form of government great, but it also makes it frustrating, right? People don't live the same life experience, so we're not going to have the same prism that we view this problem through maybe. Everybody supports veterans. Almost universally, people support veterans, and that's great. It wasn't always the case, but today it's very universally, people respect and support veterans, but they don't always know what the needs and the best ways to fill those needs for veterans are. And so I stepped up and ran for the House of Representatives and ran against a Democrat incumbent, which is not a easy thing to do, to defeat an incumbent in an election. They have the name recognition and everything else of already being in office. And I had not grown up in my district. My wife and I moved there when I came home from Iraq, but then I was gone in flight school for 2 years. So I really physically had only lived there 3 years before the election.
This actually says a lot about you, though, because the odds are incredibly stacked against you.
Oh, they were.
But your presence or some part of your message resonated with enough people that they wanted to come out and support you, because the odds are stacked against you hearing this story.
Yeah. And so we went out and started knocking on doors and talking to people and just you build that snowball over time. And on election night, 2014, 35,000 people voted in this race for state representative that I was in, and I won by exactly 148 votes. So it was the second closest margin in the entire state at the time, at that year. And I let out this big sigh of relief at 2:00 in the morning when the very last precinct comes in. Up until that moment, we had this lull as the returns were coming in, and I was ahead by 2 votes for like an hour and a half with one or two precincts.
That's negligible. I mean, it was
out of 35,000, and then we had 1 or 2 precincts left to have the returns come in, and we're right on that edge. We're up by 2 votes, and I'm like, I'd rather be up by 2 than down by 2, but it's still a pretty, knife edge to be on. We end up winning by just less than 150 votes, and I tell people this story. My wife kind of, jabs me in the ribs and goes, "Congratulations, honey. Just remember, half the people in your district already don't like you." So
I like your wife already.
So
that's awesome.
So yeah, it was crazy. And my wife had her own adventure that year. She took the state bar exam. She had graduated law school when I was just coming home from Iraq and didn't pass the bar exam the first time she took it, and then got very frustrated and kind of shelved it away for a few years. We had a baby, and then I decided to run for the state house, and she's like, "Well, I'm going to take the bar exam again." I'm like, "Great, that's awesome, do it." And then we find out she's pregnant with our daughter, and she's due the week of the bar exam. And she's like, "I'm just going to cancel my test. Like, I'm just not going to." And I'm like, "No, like the only way you're guaranteed not to pass is if you don't show up and take it. Like, we've already paid for it. You just show up.
There's
like, just
chance.
Try your best." And she's like, "Well, what if I go into labor the day before?" I'm like, then we'll
kind of a
postpone."
crazy story.
Yeah. I'm like, then you'll take the test the next time, but let's not assume bad things are going to happen just for no reason. And so we kind of put her on like self-inflicted bed rest for a few weeks before the test. She would get up early in the morning because we had a 1-year-old at the time. She would get up early in the morning, review all of her stuff, get up with our son. She was also working full time. Then at the end of the day, she would, take care of him, get him to bed. I would come home from canvassing all day and I'm exhausted. I walk in the door and then she's teaching me everything she learned that day, reviewing her bar exam prep material, and kind of, because if you teach it to somebody, you
retain it.
Exactly. So then I'm, learning stuff. And so then she takes the bar exam, 9 months pregnant, doesn't go into labor, thankfully. And we find out 2 days after my election that she had passed by the exact score that I had won the election by. So it was just a crazy.
That's like I said, that's like the universe playing a game with itself. And I hear a lot of success in your story, but anyone that listens to this story, you hear the resiliency, you hear the putting your nose down to the grindstone, you hear the hard work, you hear she easily could have said, you know what, because I'm pregnant, I'm not going to do it. And she could have gave up on that goal. I hear so much success, but it makes sense to me. I see the correlation between the type of people that you are, the grind and the work ethic you're putting in, and why you're getting that success. Yeah. You weren't supposed to win that election. Listening to the story, you were supposed to lose that election, but you put the work in, and the margin that you won by shows that every little effort you did could have made the difference.
Absolutely.
If you would have not knocked on one door or one influential thing or spoke at one event, that might have been the reason you lost.
Yeah.
So that there's a formula in that people need to learn from, that it's like, yes, we are successful in many ventures, but it's because of what you see underneath the success.
Yeah. I had an experience my very first day out canvassing and knocking on doors, which when you run for the state house and the state senate, a lot of your time is spent, going to neighborhoods and knocking on doors and just talking to people. And I found that, number one, it's a great way to talk to people. But number two, it's really hard to hate people up close. So if you're 2 feet away from them on their porch, they've seen an attack ad, they, cast you as this horrible figure, and they draw a conclusion about who you are. But then if you stand on their front porch 2 feet away from them, it sort of peels that back, and they see that you're a real person that they can relate to in some way, and that humanizing effect is so important. And I actually really enjoy still, even though it's less of what I'm able to do in this campaign, I still really enjoy the door-to-door campaigning, because it's just it grounds you so well, and it gives you that re-energized focus on why you're doing it.
Well, and that's massively important, because it's so easy in a life that has so much complexity, so much entertainment. You're so bombarded by information to just hear a label and then, based on a certain label, categorize you into a box and if you are this label, that must mean these other things.
Right.
No, it doesn't mean any of that.
Right. Right.
One label should never define a human being.
Yeah.
So when you pull those labels out of someone's mind, they realize, like, man, this is a guy that has a family in the community, that's raising children, that dedicated a large chunk of his life to servicing or being there for the country. All of that goes out the window. And I feel like, and this is me as an outsider saying, the left pushes label ideology or group mentality or group identity politics or
intersectional politics, we call
it.
Yes,
it's almost like if you fit into any of these labels, then you are the opposition, or you are the threat to what we want, or you become the oppressor, which is one of the worst ways to look at people and to look at politics or anything in general, because that is the same as stereotyping. That's the same as racism. That'd be like if I had one bad interaction with any color individual and then said, because of this interaction, this individual or that group must mean this. Right. Or I had a bad interaction with police, and that must mean that all police are this. These are irrefutably inaccurate statements that we should be against. But yet we do have a group, and this is just me speaking anecdotally to the fullest of my ability to articulate this. The left pushes identity politics. They push, if you're this label, that means all these things. Listen, the answer to a better country and better communication, which leads to a better country, is dropping labels, looking at individuals as they are. I mean, Martin Luther King, one of the greatest revolutionaries in history, talked about judge someone based on the content of their character. You're not doing that if you buy into, I don't know Tom Barrett, but he's a Republican, so that must mean all these things.
Right.
You don't know that. And you need to listen to the man. You need to look at his campaign. You need to see his record of service. This leads in perfectly to what you told me before the podcast. 291 times you voted against a party decision. Yeah. To me, that is one of the most powerful reasons why I know I want to support you, beyond the integrity I feel, beyond a lot of the things that I've gotten from meeting you in person. That tells me you're a person capable of critical thinking, who doesn't just broad stroke your campaign and say, okay, whatever my team says, I'll say. No, you say, what is best for people? What are we going to do for the families and the constituency of this state to make the future better? That's amazing. How do you have the courage in a world that is very driven by what team are you on, Tom? Yeah. Are you a part of this group or that group? How do you have the courage? Where does that come from that you were able to stand up and take on each issue individually?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And to me, I look at it as I try my best to not draw my identity from my position that I hold in office. So I'm a state senator, and that's a cool thing at a cocktail party, right? Because not many people have that experience to be a state senator, and they think it's a kind of fanciful lifestyle and all this stuff, and then they should come to my house in Charlotte and see how we live. But I recognize that I'm in a position of privilege, but I also realize it is very, very temporary. Whether I lose an election, whether I, get voted out of office, whether I, move on with some other opportunity in my life, or whether I just decide to pass the torch to someone else, or, God forbid I get smashed by a bus, on the side of the street. Like, I am not going to live as a political figure forever. And so I try not to extract my identity from that. And I look at the other things in my life. I think I'm a soldier. First, I'm a husband, a dad, and a soldier. And then further down that list, I'm a state representative, a state senator, whatever my position is that I hold. And I think when you decouple that identity from your own, like what you see of yourself, it allows you to be a lot less, conflicted, if you will. Like, oh, if I do this, I'm not, this group is going to be upset with me, or I'm going to offend that organization, or what have you. And it can kind of open your eyes to just being like, you know what? I want to do these things. Does it fit in this set of that moral compass, or that direction that I want to take, or the things that I ran for office for? Like, I didn't run for office to do X, Y, and Z. So don't give me a plate of food that has X, Y, and Z on it and expect me to eat it. Like, that's not why I ran. I didn't win by 148 votes and grind through it and take 6 months unpaid from my job in government to go through all of that, just come here and kind of half-ass it. That's not what I'm trying to do. And the more comfortable you get in your own skin. When I first got elected, I thought that most people make their voting decision kind of the way I do, which is to say that I look at candidates for office and I look at how they align on a number of issues that I care a lot about. And, those can change in their rank order based on the time, place, and everything else in society right now. And I look at, okay, who aligns the most with me, and who do I think has the greatest chance of getting elected with that alignment of ideology that I have. And then if people disappoint me, I'm like, oh, I don't like that political candidate anymore because they kind of deviated from this or that. What I actually found to be far more of the case, and I was joking earlier that most of the people in the world are what we call normal people, and they make their voting decision based upon character, relatability, likability, and how they can share a commonality with you. And the more humanizing, relatable, and passionate and principled you are, people will disagree with you on issues, sometimes even issues that are very important to them.
And still support you.
Yes, because they respect the thought process that you put into the decision that you made. So they may not agree with the final conclusion you made, but they know the thought process that went into the decision you made, and they will overwhelmingly respect you for it. And that respect, I think, bears out a big benefit. And the outcome, the proof of that, I think, my first race, I won by 148 votes against a current, member of the state house at the time. I win the election in November. In January, that same opponent that I had defeated, that same woman, announced she was going to run against me in the following cycle. I won that second race by like 12 points, or 11 or 12%. So it was thousands of votes different.
The proof is in the pudding.
Second time. And, maybe that was an endorsement of how I had voted, but I think it was a lot more an endorsement of what people viewed as my character and way of doing things. And I don't pretend to be somebody I'm not. Like, I'm a conservative, but I have an independent voting record. I have an independent, mindset to challenge my own party. My first term, I was the chairman of the Military and Veteran Affairs Committee in the State House of Representatives. I had never chaired a committee of anything in my life, had never held elected office before. And I was elected, and I became the only Iraq War veteran in the Michigan House of Representatives, a state of 10 million people, 110 state house districts, and I come out of that election as the only Iraq War veteran to serve in the House of Representatives that term. And I went to the speaker and I said, hey, this may sound crazy, but I'd really like to chair this committee because I ran for office on these issues for veterans. And he agreed and allowed me to chair that committee. And we did a lot of great things. And then a little over a year, a little less than a year and a half into my term, and these are only 2-year terms. They go by very quickly. They're like the end of the toilet paper roll, right? When you've only got a few sheets left. We had this devastating scandal at the Grand Rapids home for veterans. We have a few now, but at the time we had 2 state-run facilities for, at the time, predominantly elderly veterans, kind of like they had evolved almost into nursing homes. And one was in Grand Rapids, one in up in Marquette in the Upper Peninsula. And the one in Grand Rapids, they had performed an audit by the state auditor general and found that like 80% of the time they'd been understaffed. People were getting mistreatment. They weren't investigating claims of abuse and neglect. People were falsifying, the healthcare workers were falsifying the documents to show that they had gone in and did a bed check on so-and-so and everything. And they used the hallway security footage to show that at 9:15, when this person signed off that they had been in somebody's room, they hadn't been. And the root of it all was that they were totally understaffed and they had mismanaged this whole thing. And I insisted on taking my committee and going to Grand Rapids to the Veterans Home to perform the oversight committee hearing on this. And you need special permission to do a hearing outside of the Capitol complex in Lansing. And I went to the speaker and I said, I need to do this. I went out there. I made a promise to these guys. I had been there once before this audit showed this. And then I went back out afterward in person, didn't give them the department prior warning. I just put on my Army hoodie and some jeans and went out there and talked to some folks. And I said, I will bring my committee back here to hold a hearing so that all of you can speak to your representatives and have some accountability for this. And the leadership in the House at the time did not want to do that. They thought it was too risky. We had a Republican governor in office. They thought it could have some blowback on him. And I said, this is one of those integrity things. It's a right and wrong issue. And I didn't run for office to back away from this. Like, I didn't knock on all those doors. I didn't do all those things that I needed to do to back away in this moment. And we had a disagreement. And basically I said, look, I'm either going to resign from my position as chair of this committee, or you're going to have to let me go out there and do this. And we went and did the committee hearing in Grand Rapids, and within a year, the VA had done another review, and they were meeting like 180 of 182 criteria. Like, they had turned around a lot of the responsiveness there. And it wasn't just because of me. You know, I'm not trying to take credit for the hard work that other people did to really dig in and fix things there. But I was insistent that we do this because it was the right thing to do. And I think the veterans there, I could tell, as painful as it was for them to tell their stories of what had happened, they were so appreciative that people took the time to actually come to them. These guys are not ambulatory to come to Lansing and go to a committee hearing on the 5th floor of an office building. Like, they live in a nursing facility because they have limited mobility and they need assistance and everything else. And to go there and participate in their building meant so much to them that, if I never do anything else in politics, that's one of the things that I know we help make a difference on. And it's something that, I'm one of the most proudest achievements is just that turnaround that took place that I hope will serve as a legacy going forward.
There's magic in that story, and the fact that when you first went to the person to make the decision on that and they said, no, there might be blowback, there might be pushback, the defiance that was in you as the man that said, I know this is right. Yeah. And I am going to take a stance on this. And I'm going to push that. I will step down if it means that's what I have to do. Yeah. But I know for a fact that we need to go to these people. There's wrongs that need to be righted, and they need to know that they matter. And the fact that you had that little bit of defiance and then made it happen throughout history, people sometimes you need to tell the person that told you no, I'm not listening to this decision because I know what is true and I know what is right. And you took a stance. That's incredibly important for an elected official to have, because if you just cowered in the face of, well, you have a higher position of authority than me, you said no, you would have never made the impact you did. We need more people that do that. We need that initiative.
Thank you. One of the criticisms I hear from some people is they say, well, when military folks run for office, they just follow the leadership. And because that's what they're kind of cultured for in the military.
That's a prime example that you were willing to challenge it when necessary.
And I said, look, you follow, I sometimes joke, I spent 22 years following the guy in front of me. Like, that's, what you do in the Army. But at the same time, you got to have that confidence to, yes, respect your leadership, respect those. And I remind my colleagues in the legislature, I'm like, none of you guys here are constituents of mine. My constituents are the people that live in my district. All of us come from different districts. And while some of us may be in a position elevated above one another to make some decisions, and, I say that with all respect for those in leadership roles. I'm not saying that this is a combative relationship or anything, but I'm like, I remind each other sometimes, I'm like, you're not one of my constituents. The 275,000 people that live in my district, those are my constituents. Those are my bosses. I have 275,000 bosses that I answer to, and if I lose their respect or confidence, then I no longer have their trust to do this job any longer. So it's, and you can get persuaded by, people you serve alongside of, or they're trying to advance their cause that's important to them. And for the overwhelming issues that we face, people come to it with the right, I think, mindset at the
good intentions.
Yeah, the initiation of what they're trying to do is good. It may be something I disagree with, but in their perspective, they have good intentions and they're doing it for the right reasons.
But then they can get off course.
Yeah, and sometimes we call it mission creep in the Army, where this is how you have really bad mishaps. Is you start out, we're going to fly from here to here. The weather's perfect conditions. We got plenty of fuel. No big deal. We're going to go from A to B, and it's no big problem. Well, then they want you to go from A to C to B, and oh, by the way, the weather's going to get a little sketchy up there, but it won't be till 45 minutes after you're through that area, so you'll probably be fine. Well, then it's like, oh, the weather starts shifting, and then we got to add in another stop, but then we're going to pick up some extra guys, and these things churn, and that mission creep changes to where all of a sudden you have a really bad mishap, and you either, damage an aircraft, or God forbid somebody dies. Those are things that, we reverse engineer after a bad thing happens and say, all right, what led to this, and what were the steps along the way that had failure in them, so we can learn from them and go forward. And that mission creep is so easy to fall into. And it happens in policy also, where you start out with one set of ideas in a bill, but it gets amended and it gets a little nicked here, and then it gets changed there, and they take a definition and they remove that part. And by the time you come out the other side, sometimes it's better. Like there are times where I've offered amendments to bills to make them better. Other times you start here and you end here, and it doesn't really closely resemble the original
100%. And what might have started it as good can be terrible precedent that can lead to terrible down the road.
Yeah.
So we have to, you know what it is? You just have to keep your eyes on things very closely, and you have to learn from experience. Like I can speak, I think, for a large majority of people as a good man that runs a business that's successful in my community. I love following leadership when it's good leadership. Mm-hmm. I am not disobedient in the way of like, I just want to challenge things for the sake of challenging them.
Yeah.
I love good leadership. If you show me a great leader, I will adamantly follow and support that great leader.
Yeah.
But if you have a leader that is not a great leader, or that has incredibly questionable decisions, I'm going to be exactly like you in the way that I will challenge that leader. Sometimes I will even be defiant to it I will not compromise my character or my principles just because an authority figure said so.
Right.
I feel that messaging from you. And something else that I've gotten from you that I've never gotten from another politician in my life, this is a big statement, ever, and I've interviewed a lot of them, is I hear Tom the father, Tom the husband, Tom the community member, Tom the public servant coming through the messaging of this. I don't hear Tom the politician, or it's way lower on the rung, right? And that is normally the opposite of what I get. Generally speaking, I get given the campaign answers. I get given the generalities that really don't say much. They paint a broad vision that it's kind of hard to be against, but it's kind of hard to really be for. Sitting on this podcast with you today, I hear Tom, the husband, father, community member that wants to do soldier, that wants to do the right thing.
Thank you. I look at, like I said, I try and somebody told me this when I first came into office. They said, this is temporary, so do your best, absorb what you can, enjoy the experience. Not many people have this opportunity in life to vote on laws that affect the people of the state of Michigan this way. This is a powerful, and the gravity of it is real. But one of the things they told me is they said, your biggest regrets are going to be things you didn't do with the opportunity you had. Not things you did do, not votes you cast that you regret. We all have in retrospect, 7 years ago, I probably should have voted differently on this bill because we didn't know what was going to happen, down the line and all this stuff. We're all going to have those. And I try and make the best decision I can with the information I have available at the time that I make it. And
that's all you can do.
It's all you can do. And we don't have, it's a binary decision. When we vote on a bill, everybody's name fills up on a board inside the chamber in alphabetical order, and you push a green button or a red button at your desk to vote yes is green and no is red. There's no yellow. Well, there is a yellow button, but it means something else. But you can't vote yellow on the legislation.
What people may not see, though, is, listen, I might have pressed the green button, but it's because I was 54% on that side.
Exactly.
Not because I said, absolutely, I agree with all of this.
Or I voted red because I was 99% okay with it, but this 1% was so important that I
could not concede on it.
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
And then they assign, different methodology or intent. People will easily assign intent to a yes or a no vote on a particular issue. And I can give you an example. When I was even first starting to run, there is this practice in Michigan. We have a bunch of different revenue streams for different parts of government. It's not just one big pot of money. People think, we pay our taxes, you buy your driver's license, you buy a bag of chips, you pay sales tax on it. We think it all comes into one central bank account, and then we're splicing out every piece of it. What actually happens is, there are some general fund revenues that come in, but the overwhelming majority is what we call restricted funds. So you buy a fishing license, that goes into the Department of Natural Resources for them to make sure that the habitat is appropriate and that people aren't poaching, and we pay for enforcement. If you get a traffic ticket, there's a fee on there that goes into funding law enforcement to keep, troopers on the road and keep sheriff's deputies patrolling and things like that. So those are kind of segregated off, like the fund that they go into. Our state school aid fund is what funds our education, our schools, K-12 education. There's been this habit over time, starting about 15 years ago, where the school aid fund, which comes predominantly from sales tax, the legislature will peel money out of that and put it into our universities. Now, universities, they can charge tuition. They've got, all kinds of endowments.
Private entities.
They have evolved into this kind of elite,
100%.
structure, right? And, they've got these deans. They're kind of bloated on the administrative side of things. There's a lot there, and they're taking more and more out of our K-12 system every year. So you're basically taking money out of a fifth grade classroom to pay for the settlement that they paid the U of M President Schlissel, that he got that $1 million settlement when he left. I don't think that's a worthy
Doesn't
cause.
make sense to me.
And so I've held the line that we should not be funding higher education out of the school aid budget. That's for our K-12 system. I have voted consistently that way for 8 years. This is my 8th year in the legislature, and I have voted no on the education budget because of that. Even when I agree with a lot of parts and pieces that are within that, I've said, if you're taking money out, that's a commitment I made to the people of my district that I would not vote to do that. Because you're doing that, I have to vote no. This last year, the budget that we just voted on a few weeks ago, they put a sizable investment into school safety grants that came out of the school aid budget. Historically, we had done that through the state police and used other, budget resources to do it. This time, they put it into the school aid budget and put quite a sum of money into school safety, which is obviously very important to everybody. Every parent, every person in society realizes that's important. But they continue to suck money out to fund these universities. So I vote against it. And I give some brief remarks on the Senate floor, and I'm like, look, of course I believe in these things and this part of it and this part of it and this part of it, but I made a commitment to people in my district that I would not support this practice of taking money out of this side of things to fund this over here. Like, you have to be honest and consistent with how you do these things. If this fund is for K-12 schools, use it for that. Don't pull money out and pay for, deans and administrators at, the University of Michigan. And I'm like, so I have to vote no on this. Like, that's just the reality of it. I'm a man of my word, and I'm going to follow what I said I would do. And, now the narrative coming out of it is, of course, well, Tom Barrett voted against school safety money, because I voted no on that budget for obviously different reasons. And it's like, okay, am I going to change who I am? I've been 7 years now. On the 8th year, am I going to say, you know what? It doesn't count anymore. 7 years, 7 out of 8 is good enough, right?
No, you have integrity, you have principle, you have character. You won't.
And I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And if people vote against me because I stuck to my principles, I'll be disappointed.
So be it, though.
But I can live with it. If I change my principles and lose anyway, or even win in spite of it, I can't do that. Like, I can't set that example to my kids. And, and like I said, things we vote on are imperfect from the beginning. Nothing is perfect legislation. Even bills that I write that I introduce, I'm sure, 5-10 years down the road could be improved upon. But we make decisions in the best case we can. And there are some things where I'm like, I made a commitment that I would not do X. You're asking me to do X. I'm not going to do it. Like, it's just not going to happen.
I don't even need to know the specific things. Knowing that there's a man that sticks to his convictions and what he ran on and made promises to his constituency is way more important than the individual issue. You're almost a man working within a flawed system where there's too many issues to vote on each thing individually one by one. So it all gets packaged together. Mm-hmm. So you have these yeses that aren't really yeses.
Yeah.
And you have no's that, man, you really don't want to say no, but there's one foundation you will not crumble on.
Right.
It's a very flawed system in that way.
It is.
Because you can't just imagine if you could just address every individual thing, then you could really see a representation of who Tom Barrett is and what he stands for.
Right.
Versus in the current culture where they just want to grab a soundbite or they just want to throw a headline article on and say, Tom Barrett voted against blah. Yeah. Well, they're only doing that to try to bastardize you. Without looking at, well, why? Well, look at his track record. For 7 years, he has said, I don't think we should be taking from our children and giving it to institutions that might not even be preaching and teaching ideology that is what we want for our kids. And we are funding these programs. I believe that money belongs to our children in our communities. Well, if all of a sudden people start to get informed and hear that is your stance, now they're not as likely to be against you.
Right.
But what you can say, and I think will come through this podcast, is you're a man that stays on your convictions, and that is important. Because I'm never going to be able, even if I was your best friend that spent every day with you, we sat and talked, I would never get to know your stance on every issue in the world. Mm-hmm. What I need to know is he a good human being that will stand on his convictions, that's willing to push back when pushback is needed, that will, the father, the husband, the soldier will use his voice when necessary. If I know those things, I don't need to know what you're going to vote in the next one because I know the man that you are.
Right. And I have, as I told you before our podcast, I have peers that I've served with, some that are on my side of the aisle, and none of us have an exactly perfectly aligned voting. We all vote differently at times. We kind of have a general consensus, if you will, on the Republican side and a bit of a general consensus on the Democrat side, certainly, but there's crossover that happens. And like you said, 290 sometimes I've voted against my own party. And I don't go out as a contrarian just looking to, be against things. But I do start from a kind of a sense of healthy skepticism and go through a methodical approach that way. And
you're seeking truth.
Yeah.
You're seeking what's right.
Right.
You're trying to do a decision you feel good about, right?
Right. I want to know that, and I've told my staff this too. I'm like, I got to be able to defend my vote, and I can't defend my votes if they're not me. If it is what I think people want, and I vote according to that, it is not like I'd rather go out and defend a vote that I believe in that somebody else disagrees with than go out and defend a vote that I thought was politically expedient and just, and not have my heart into it. And it's served me well. The recipe's worked so far, so I'm not, I'm not
authenticity.
But like I was saying, I've served with colleagues who are very opposite worldview of my own, very, very on the pretty extreme liberal side of things. And when I see that passion and intensity and sincerity, I respect it. Even when I disagree, I'm like, you know what? I respect that guy stepping out on the ledge for what he thinks is right or wrong, and not just following the party line. We've had these interesting alignments on some issues where some of us on the conservative side have aligned with some on the liberal side around open and transparent government things, also around corporate welfare. I have a near perfect record voting against corporate welfare subsidies because I don't think it's fair to take your tax money that you work so hard for and shovel it into some of the most profitable corporations just because the government gives them that benefit. It's not even a tax structure thing. It is we're going to give you cash for locating here to allegedly create and produce jobs in our state. The most recent one...
trickle-down effect, right?
Right. That's what they say is they're like, well, if they don't come here, they're going to go somewhere else. Well, back in December, we voted on this massive incentive deal. It was a $1 billion corporate incentive deal to have General Motors come in and build an electric vehicle plant in Michigan. Now, they may have decided to come here anyway. Like, we can't ignore that possibility. And it's $1 billion. And when you break down the cost per job that they say they are creating under this plan, it is over $160,000 of your tax money for every single job that they're creating. And then it pits, the folks that you employ are deemed less important to the state than the folks that are going to work at this new battery plant, for example, or the people that employ folks all throughout Charlotte, where I live. I'm like, I can't support these things. And then we actually find, when you look at the data, that they pull these corporate, they're called site selectors. They're people that go out and review locations for building the new Amazon headquarters, the new automotive plant, the new location for this or that. And they pull these site selectors. There's a magazine called Site Selector Magazine that's kind of the one that is the industry for this, industry trade magazine. They do a top 10 list every single year. And in that top 10 list, talent and talent development are always number 1 and 2. Infrastructure is usually number 3. Energy costs, right to work status, labor, laws and like state and local regulatory environment, all those things are in that top 10. And then at the very bottom of the list is incentives.
But yet we're giving $1 billion of people's tax money.
We could take that $1 billion and we could pave a brand new highway from the state capitol building in Lansing all the way to the Mackinac Bridge, pay for it in cash, and have money left over for that kind of money.
Yeah, people don't rationalize what $1 billion is because we throw these words, a million, a billion, a trillion around.
Yeah.
That's 1,000 millions.
It is.
You are giving as an incentive for a company that it's way down on the rungs on why they're going to make the decision.
Yeah.
This doesn't make sense. This isn't intelligent, decision making for your constituency if you are considering them in the debate.
Can I look up a note on my phone real
absolutely.
quick? I gotta quiz you.
I was fascinated by what you just told me there. So absolutely.
Okay. So let me ask you this: how long do you think 1 million seconds is?
1 million seconds.
If you just had to guess, you're supposed to be doing the interview, so I'm
I'm taking 1 million seconds, maybe a year.
It's about 12 days. A million seconds.
Jesus. All right, way less. Okay, 12 days.
So guess how long 1 billion seconds is?
1 billion. So it'd be 1,000 times that. So 1,000. So 12,000 days. So 12,000 days divided by 365 is 30 some years.
31 years. Very good. Do you know how long 1 trillion seconds is? So remember, 1 million seconds is about 12 days. How long is 1 trillion seconds?
1 trillion seconds would be 12 days times 1 million. So 12 million days, if that's correct. Is that right?
It is.
Is a trillion?
This is going to blow your mind. 1 trillion seconds is 31,700 years long.
Yeah.
A trillion
makes
seconds.
Sense. So we throw these words because during the 2020 thing, they approved what? 3 trillion initially and then more and more and more.
Yeah.
People have no rational
right.
That number doesn't mean anything
once you
to you.
Trigger the next, you go from million to billion, then billion becomes the new kind of buzzword, and it just loses its potency.
But 1 billion is the same difference from 1 trillion as it is to 1 million.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
For the people listening, you have to have 1 million millions to have $1 trillion.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. So if I had $1 million stacked up in this room, we'd have to have 1 million of those rooms to have 1 trillion.
Yeah.
That's the type of funds we're talking
Right.
about. So when someone throws around the word billion, it is an incredibly substantial number.
It is.
That's a really good way to break it down.
Yeah.
Using the time like that. That was really good.
'Cause-
I love math and I love all those
you
things.
can remember 12 days ago, like you pull up your phone. Oh, I had lunch with my buddy.
35,000 years. You said.
Yeah, 31,000. Yeah, almost 32,000 years. Is
That's
a trillion
the difference
seconds.
between 1,000,000 seconds and 1 trillion seconds. That's
Yeah.
alarming.
Yeah,
100%.
It's just unfathomable. Our comprehension of
Your
that
brain doesn't wrap around that. It's just like trying to consider the universe and the size of it and like where the Earth is, and you can't actually get it into your brain. You can only say the numbers. So now let's talk about what we have going on right now. So you've built an excellent storyline of Tom the representative, the family man. You have multiple children now. You're about to run for a new office.
Yes.
And let's talk about this race. Talk about what do you think are the central keys to your platform or the things that you want people to know about you the most.
Yeah. So I'm running for the United States Congress this year, which is, of course, a federal position. I'm in the state legislature now, and every 10 years we do a census, and then the outcome of that census is we redraw our district lines for our representatives, whether that's in the state legislature or the federal Congress. All of them are supposed to be almost equal in population. You can't get precisely equal, but we make them as reasonably population equal as we can. Michigan actually lost one congressional district because we're competing across the country for our market share of seats in Congress. We did not grow in population at the pace that other states did. So some southern states, I think like Florida, Texas, Arizona, a handful of others, they grew faster than other states did. So we lost. We had 14 congressional districts in Michigan, and we pared down to now 13. So each of them are bigger geographically, bigger population-wise as well.
And that's something worth looking into. Right before we go into the story, why are people leaving a certain state or going to a different spot? What is it about those areas or ideologies that would draw people into wanting to raise their family and future there? I think a lot of people may understand or may know why, but that's an incredibly important thing because that is our say in the country.
It is. Yep. And when we lose our market share, we lose things like Great Lakes, resources and
funding and the ability to affect presidential races based on electoral votes.
Exactly. So all of this has an impact. And we've lost a congressional district in Michigan, I think, each of the last 3 or 4 censuses, I think. So going back at least to 2000, 2010, and 2020, we've lost at least one congressional district in Michigan each time, and before that, I guess I just don't remember back that far. But anyway, differently this year is in 2018, the people of Michigan amended the state constitution to put in place this new commission that will draw these district boundaries. So historically, it's done by the state legislature. We, get out a pencil and draw the boundaries. They got to be equal in population. You got to have certain minority considerations for minority populations that you can't break them apart so that they don't have a market share that's allowing them to elect a, representative appropriately.
This is an incredibly important role, though.
Oh,
I mean, the way that this gets drawn is incredibly important.
It is. And in 2018, voters in Michigan decided to delegate this to a so-called independent commission. And I say so-called because the commission itself was supposed to be, I think it was 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and 5 independents.
Exactly how it should be done.
Well, with that, we don't have any party registration in Michigan. So you might say you're a Democrat, and we can't prove you wrong. You might say that I'm a Democrat. I will confess to you, since it's just you and me, I have actually voted for a Democrat on the ballot before. So, I'm an elected Republican. I've actually voted for a Democrat on my ballot before.
Because you believed in the person.
Yeah. But does that make me a Democrat?
No.
No, not at all. But, there's no definitional standard for what that means. And there's also no standard for what it means to be an independent. So that's
a slippery slope because you can easily get biased then on that commission, which can affect a massively important thing.
One of the independent commissioners who was selected was a guy who had a long history of being a Bernie Sanders advocate. And he thought of himself as an independent because he didn't like Hillary Clinton, right? It wasn't because he was a mix, like he doesn't mix his ballot as to who he's voting for. But that's just one example.
You would think common sense would stop things like this from taking place, but this is so common that you hear stories like this.
Politics becomes this battleground where each side tries to
get wins for the team, right?
And leverage opportunities and their strategy. And look, there's strategy in all this. Like, as long as it's above board, strategy is a facet of political campaigns. It's part of why I like politics is there's, it's like the ultimate sport where there's a winner, there's a loser, there's strategy, there's, tactics, dynamics, and everything else. But the results
I feel like
matter.
There's also rules of the game
there are.
that should be there based on integrity and should be the right thing. And when you start to blur those lines and when you start to say, well, we're going to make it a private commission and we're going to select the people, we're not going to really look at their track record. We're not going to look at what the facts say or what the truth is. We're just going to get wins for our team.
Yeah.
That's a slippery slope.
It is. And so this commission has to draw all these district lines. For the state house, all 110. For the state senate, all 38. For these 13 congressional districts. And they start doing that. And they take public input and all this other stuff. And me as a kind of a stakeholder in this, I'm watching this happen in real time. And I'm like, oh, geez, I don't know. They're talking about this. And, some people want to connect like East Lansing to, rural communities in Eaton County, like just that have nothing in common as far as lifestyle or anything else. But they think, oh, if we do this, then there'll be more Democrats.
It's going to push that seat this way.
Yes,
I mean, these are corrupt
wedge
things.
This, yeah.
Because you should be actually trying to, without considering the party, objectively look at the constituency and allow them to voice what they want and voice, what their needs are, and then represent them correctly with all of the representatives then, kind of warring it out on the battlefield that you're talking about. If you change districts in a way that like, if we put these people together, but there's a, 55% on this side. Exactly. What you're doing is you're silencing half or close to half those people.
And I will tell you, the crossfire in this is the accusation that, like Republicans have been in majority in the legislature, so they spike the punch for their side. And on the commission, there's skepticism by some of the people that were on the commission. It's like, well, they did it this way. And what I believe is a fundamental conclusion of all this is that all of us have a political bias. Every single one of us.
Well, for sure. You know what resonates with you.
Right. And that's not a bad thing. But it makes it very hard then to be entirely objective because everybody thinks they're objective and everybody else is biased. And in reality, it's like, no, we all have a bias on this political stuff. If we care about it, if we vote and we sincerely care, we're going to have some, bias in there as to our side being right and the other side being wrong. That's natural to expect
human
that
nature.
That would happen. And I don't know how you ever distill that out of a process that is driven by human beings. But regardless, there's this commission. They draw these districts, and it was all delayed because the census was delayed because of all the COVID stuff happening. So they were supposed to have them done by like summer of 2021. And they didn't finish them until right before New Year's. It was like day before New Year's Eve of 2021. And they drew this congressional district that it basically absorbs nearly all of the state Senate district that I represent right now. So I represent Eaton, Clinton, Shiawassee, and a piece of Ingham County in the state Senate. This congressional district is Eaton, Clinton, Shiawassee, Ingham, Livingston, and a couple of communities in Oakland County, South Lyon and Milford, and then I think like 100 people in Genesee County that may have been accidentally added in with their, highlighter pen as they were drawing in these districts. But regardless, hoping to represent them as well. And the interesting outcome of this is that this district is like very competitive, like 50-50 competitive. And it absorbs the area that I represent in the Michigan Senate right now. And I represent an area that's very competitive. In fact, the year I got elected to the Senate in 2018, Gretchen Whitmer won my Senate district by about 4 points that year. And I won my seat by 10 points against one of the best funded and best organized and run against a woman candidate, that in the year of the woman in 2018, when there was a lot of tailwinds for Democrats, and Gretchen Whitmer, of course, won statewide by a sizable margin. In my Senate district, she carried that by 4 points, and we won by 10, doing that, hard work like we were talking about. But I have a competitive state Senate district, and now this competitive congressional seat forms up this way. And my wife and I were talking about it, and I said, I don't feel like I have to go to Congress, but I do feel like I'm in a position to try and change what is happening because I am so dissatisfied with the trajectory of where things are going in the country right now. And I feel like if I'm in a position to be able to do something about it, shame on me if I don't step up and try my best. And I looked around, there was this progression of last year. Joe Biden comes in, things get crazy. One of the big turning points in my decision was what happened in Afghanistan and the withdrawal of Afghanistan.
Remember when you were sleeping in the sleeping bag with your machine gun because you knew how important the weaponry was and you didn't want to let everybody down?
Yeah. If I so much as got a scratch on an Army helicopter, there would be a massive investigation, and we're just giving them away to the Taliban. And I felt so strongly that we needed to leave Afghanistan. We'd been there 20 years. I realized when I was in Iraq that we can't force our value structure that we intrinsically still have in this country, as much as it is being eroded a bit. We still have this intrinsic belief in self-guided, self-governance, representative democracy, and everything else. They didn't share that belief, unfortunately, and they didn't value it the way that we do. And it's almost like I realize it's a little bit like welfare, like we were saying, how you take people's, really self-determination and their, highest abilities away from them. Their potential is robbed of them because they kind of just eke by. That's what it felt like. Like, we're here to give you these opportunities, but unless you kind of fight and have some skin in the game and embrace them, you're not going to defend them when it gets hard. And that's what I sort of realized was the cultural difference. It's like trying to push a rope. You can't do it. And that's sad, but it's also reality. And we can't continue to send American troops over there to force this Western cultural idea on them.
The entire hierarchy over there would almost have to start from the ground up on education and teaching the principles and values of freedoms.
But they'd
and
have
liberties.
to believe it too
Exactly.
to do that.
And the hierarchy there, the people in power don't want that. They want all the power and influence to funnel to the top. So us trying to just do that creates conflict.
And what I realized is they also have the right to self-determination of their government. And if they don't want these things that I would fight to the death over for our own country, then I can't make them take it. You can't just do it for them.
100%.
And so I felt strongly like we needed to leave Afghanistan, very strongly. And then Biden makes the decision to leave, which I'm like, great, like we need to do this. Trump started that, first domino falling, and Biden's the kind of recipient of that, and then, makes the determination.
And you're in support of that. You're saying like, hey, this is a good thing.
Yes. But
then the execution.
Oh my gosh, he completely forfeits the game on the way out the door. And it's like, you cannot do that. And you could tell this disaster was coming. And you have the Taliban in charge of security for our troops, and directly leads to 13 Marines getting killed in a totally preventable way. And those Marines, I told you, I was a 20-year-old kid in Korea, on duty, on a duty assignment there. We had 20-year-olds getting killed in Afghanistan on our way out. And I'm like, that could have been me. It could have been my life. If I was born a few years later and that was the circumstance that I was in, I was a 20-year-old kid, on a duty station. I could have been in Afghanistan that day. And there's been no accountability for that. None.
As a man really deep in politics, Tom, the common sense, let's say this, the question that pops into my mind is how in the world does something actually get executed like that? Because it was such a grand failure.
It was.
How does that happen when clearly the men at the top, like a Joe Biden, he has access to information that a regular civilian couldn't even dream of.
Yeah.
They know how to execute plans. There's decades worth of military strategy and ways to do things.
Right.
How does it go so wrong? I don't understand that part.
I don't either. And part of it to me is that our military leaders are focusing on the wrong things. They're far more woke and ideologically, politically driven now than they are on like battlefield optimization. And they care more about feelings than they do about, executing the mission. When I was in flight school, it was tough. And our commander there, people, flight students, other soldiers would come in, they'd kind of complain and be like, oh, this is whatever. My instructor was mean to me or something like that, And he said, look, this is the U.S. Army. We don't sell flowers. We shoot people in the face. So, get on board or get out. But
100%.
like, that is the life that you're choosing here, and that doesn't mean you indiscriminately go out and shoot people.
No, of course.
In the face, but
Listen,
this is our job.
Nobody wants the
Yeah.
darkness to exist in the world. Nobody wants the evils of the world to exist. But if you are naive to the way that
Right.
some parts of the world are,
Right.
you're only harming good people.
Yeah.
So some things are
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah, they told us in basic training. They're like, look, our job, kill people, break things. Like, that's it. When we have a mission, and when we're engaged in a conflict, and we have a mission, our job is to destroy the will of the enemy to resist. So completely break their spirit and destroy their will to resist, and destroy the will of the people to harbor the enemy too. And that's how you gain ground and win wars and change cultures and everything else. You can't do it from this expectation that we're going to only kill bad guys. Like, we, even with the best technology we have, people, and this is true of Americans back home, have this really false expectation that we have a bad guy switch on the bomb, that when it goes off, it's only going to kill bad guys.
Or they're all in one tiny location,
Right.
and it's so easy to just go in and
Right.
extract them or take care of them. It's not that way. That's the
No,
movies.
It is. And good people die inadvertently in war. And it's not that we are trying to kill good people or even innocent people that, are probably not aligned with us but may not be on board with the other side either. They're at least not combatants that deserve to be engaged. Unfortunately, that happens.
There's
in
casualties
war.
on both sides.
You look at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, carpet bombings of whole cities in World War II. And I'm not saying that should be our what we should just flip a switch and go nuke a city or a country. But again, we have to destroy their will to resist. And we're losing that focus. And that's some tough love stuff that we got to do. And, General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is more focused on, the transgender shower policies in the Pentagon than maybe figuring out how to extract a population from an airfield that's already secured than doing it from a civilian, airport in the middle of the city that has got so many, vulnerable access points and everything else.
We're losing focus on some
We
things.
are.
On some things that there's. Remember when you said almost everybody starts with good intentions, and then we lose focus, and then it leads to a catastrophe. That mission creep, I'm going to use that statement from now on, because you can see that there is intent there to like, well, I'm going to try to make things better. But if you lose sight of what your goal is, you can make things far worse.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah.
So you have this upcoming election. What do you think are the keys to getting people to see the man that I sit here with today, so that people understand that like you are the right choice for them? What do you think the keys to victory are in this strategy you're a part of?
Well, unfortunately, we feel like our opposition, they're very, very well funded, and their pathway to victory is probably to just go totally scorched earth. And they're going to have a lot of resources to do that. And I think anything that we can do to make ourselves resilient to that, by just talking to people, having real conversations, and being a human being. Like, that's what I am. I get up in the morning and, my life is chaos. I got 4 kids and, trying to make a cup of coffee and, and during the school year, get the kids out the door. And I'm always, you're juggling so much and everything. I'll give you a little bit of a preview. We just filmed some commercials that we're going to run over the weekend. And, my kids were in a lot of these, and we have some kind of funny stuff with our kids in there, talking about our minivan and just, the real life stuff that comes from being
the real Tom.
Yeah. And, and our kids are hilarious. I mean, they're crazy and they can be a lot to, a lot to deal with at times, but, they're great because they really do humanize you in a way that keeps you grounded and focused. And I mean, this is a little bit of a not sad, but a little bit, after I voted against that big $1 billion incentive I told you about, the Democrats put up this giant billboard on I-69, one of the side of the freeway, like largest billboards you can get, with my picture on it. It says, Tom Barrett voted against 5,000 Michigan auto jobs, on this billboard with my picture.
There's the headline, Tom, with no context.
Exactly. And so we're driving, and it's not like they call me and tell me, hey, we put up this billboard against you. Like, I just discover this driving through one day. And it's like, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, hey, that's my face. Like, and, I, of course, tell my team about it and tell my wife about it, but I don't tell my kids about it. They don't even worry about that. They're blissfully ignorant for the most part, which is great. My oldest is only 9 years old. I don't want them to be, worried about
taking
me.
on the stress of the world yet at 9 years
you
old.
You only get to be 9 once in your life.
Be 9.
Yeah, exactly. The world is hard when you grow up to get there. Like, don't rush it. Like, it'll come along, and believe me, it'll be hard enough. So we're in the car, and I'm driving, and my 7-year-old daughter sees the billboard, and she's like, Dad, there's a billboard with your picture on it. Like,
that's awesome.
Yes. And she's just like amazed by this. And we drive by too quickly for her to really read it. And my son, who's 9, did read it. He's like, yeah, like they said something mean about Dad or something. And she's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, some people that don't really like me, they just put up that billboard, and, there's going to be a lot of that over the next year as we're doing this campaign. And, it's just something that's going to happen, and people have the right to express their opinion. But the people who put up this billboard, they just don't really like me. She's like, I still like you, Dad. So it was like, for her, it was, you're my dad, you're my hero. Like, I don't understand how people couldn't like you. Like, I love you more than, just about anybody else in the world. And, how are these people, how do they not see that? What are they not seeing or whatever? And, that's a kind of a little bit of a life lesson for a little kid.
And I think that's why you need to really value you and your family and your stance and who you are, because, man, a lot of people would never want that type of thing. They would not want to be on a billboard on the side of the highway, seeing them getting, roasted to all these people with just a headline, with no context, feeling like, man, that is not a representation of me.
Right.
But you have that spine to say, you know what, let them say those things because I know who I am and I know why I voted. And it goes back to the part of your story where you said, listen, with my team, you said, if I vote on something, I have to believe in it. I have to be able to take a stance on it. Because then you will debate that with anyone.
Right.
Anyone that wanted to discuss that billboard and say, Tom, I'm thinking about voting for you and supporting you in this election, but I saw on this billboard that you were opposed to this. Can you explain why?
Yeah.
You will be able to do so.
If they take the time.
If they take the time.
Too often we're doing this like kind of soundbite headline, way of political discourse, and we're all guilty of it. Like you can't do the like long form. I can't do a podcast with all 780,000 people in my district. So, I'm like, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to be who I am. I hope people see that. I'm going to fight like hell. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to campaign, and I'm going to do all those things that I think I need to do. And we're going to, work on strategy and messaging and how we can present my arguments to people. And we're going to trust the people that vote and let them make a decision. And some of them will vote for me. Some of them won't. And, on election night, we hope to have more votes than my opponent. But ultimately, it's the people that make this decision. And if they don't have the confidence in me to do this, then I guess it wasn't meant to be. And I'll go do something else. I mean, sometimes I joke that I'm in politics because I don't have any real life skills. So, I guess I'll have to find a real job to do. But, I'm not, obviously I'm not suggesting I'm going to lose this election, but I am also realizing
it'll be okay.
Yeah, this is not what makes my life. And I know that my life is not what I do in politics. My life is everything outside of that. And this is what I'm doing to try and hold the baton for the time that I can before I pass it to the next person, and hopefully have my kids still have a country worth enlisting for, defending, fighting for, and having that fire in the belly to be willing to go put a machine gun in your sleeping bag in Korea, right? In the freezing cold. And that's just my hope, So I made the decision to run for Congress. Afghanistan was a big motivator for that. Then following that was the mandate on troops after they promised us that there would be all these exemptions that never materialized. I got COVID in 2020, early in the pandemic.
Same.
I overcame it, thankfully. I had very few symptoms.
Same.
And then afterward, I donated plasma and antibodies to other people. The Red Cross contacted me, and I went in and donated that. And what struck me about this and all the hysteria around it, I'm at the Red Cross. This is like a month after I am out of quarantine and everything else. And I'm on this like dialysis machine that they use to scrape out all your antibodies that they're putting through and everything to put those into other people's body to help them recover. And I'm on this machine, and you have to wear a mask in the Red Cross blood donation center. I'm like, okay, I get it. You got a policy, fine. So I'm sitting there and I'm wearing my mask and I'm talking to the nurse. She comes by every few minutes to check on me. I don't have use of my arms, and my mask would like slip down my face. And she kept coming by and picking it up and putting it back over my nose. And I asked her, I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I just got to ask this question. It's probably not, appropriate to ask. I'm like, but you realize they're about to inject my blood into other people, but you're worried about me breathing on them. Like, is that logical? Like, I can't really get there in my mind.
It's a great question.
And it just was, and that's sort of that unsettling feeling about it. And,
and that's a quest for the truth. That's the man that has to understand his world. There was arrows in our grocery stores, Tom. There was people that would go to walk down an aisle, would stop and turn around. Now listen, I will follow all just laws. I will follow good leadership. I will follow good human beings. I will always try to do what I believe a good man should do. I am never going to walk into a grocery store and walk the most complex puzzle ever, because somehow if I enter the hall from this side, people are safe, but if I enter it from this side, they're not. That type of breakdown of the truth and reality and things like that leads to all kind of madness.
And you know what's scary about it is it takes out, it conditions people to think, to delegate their own
or
decision.
Not to think.
Yes, so it conditions people to delegate their own thoughts and their own decision making to other people, to the government.
Tell me what to do.
Tell me what's safe and what isn't. And it's like, no, you can't. And now what? When the next crisis comes along, when the next thing happens, now we've conditioned people. We got to put warning labels on the iron that says don't iron your clothes while you're wearing them. We got to put everything has to come with all these things on there so that people just lose that. It's like a muscle that atrophies. You don't have that ability to make your own risk analysis anymore.
100%.
And then you just turn into a society that has completely delegated this. And then guess what? We realize the government doesn't always have our best interest in mind, doesn't have it in heart. They make these massive mistakes. And then what do we have? And you can't go back and redo it.
The antithesis to this, the way that we fix the country, is getting back to individuals seeking truth with a foundation of good morality that come together and are willing to speak up. And we find elected officials that have a spine that say, listen, I am who I am, and I will discuss with anyone, but I will stand on my integrity. I will not just give you orders that I wouldn't follow myself. I'm not going to put the person on blast that was at the head, but there was people that were giving orders to the people on what they had to do in 2020, while at the exact same time not following any of those. As soon as I see that, if you were the leader of this academy, let's say you were the coach and I was the fighter, and you're setting down all these rules and you don't abide by them yourself, I lose respect for you as a leader.
Yep. And that leadership aspect of it is so important, because people are looking to you when you don't even realize it. They're looking at you to look at your behaviors. And I told my wife this. We actually moved. We were living in a small suburb neighborhood that was, it was like a 10-year-old neighborhood, and not a lot of mature trees there. And you could kind of see everybody's backyard from one another. And we lived there for like 4 years while I was in the state house. And we had great neighbors. And one day someone was attacking me online with one of these political attacks. And my neighbor behind us went on to kind of defend me, and she's like, oh, Tom Barrett's not a bad guy. I've watched him pick up his own dog poop in the backyard. And I'm like, I appreciate that. However, like, now I kind of feel like I can't go outside and pick up dog poop in my pajamas because everybody's watching, right? So we kind of live in a little bit more rural area now. And the major part of it was we had outgrown our house when we had more kids. And when we were looking for a new house, we're like, we want to be a little bit outside so that we're not, my kids deserve to be able to grow up privately, to make their own mistakes, to get in trouble, and to not feel like everybody's watching them all the time. And I just know that people are watching what we do even when you don't expect them to.
Especially in your position. There's a magnifying glass on you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you can handle that light because you respect yourself and you know who you are. That's why you can handle that light. But there is a magnifying glass on you.
Yeah, and there should be. I mean,
there
we
should be.
have
There should be
people,
transparency.
You know, it gets a little bit weird when people, you know, want to barge into your private life kind of, you know, in ways. And the other thing is, you know, people don't understand, like if I'm running into the grocery store because I need one thing that we ran out of at home and I'm on my way back and we're in a hurry and then they want to, hey, Tom, can I talk to you about, you know, this bill that passed 6 months ago that you don't remember voting on? I want to tell you all about it. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I don't have the capacity to right now. Can we, you know, set up a meeting or, you know, or you stop and talk to them at the grocery store? I love having conversations with people just kind of spontaneously that way, because that's where you get that real. They don't know you're coming to the grocery store that day. They're not practicing their jam you up question about what they're going to do and all this other stuff that becomes that, you know, kind of combatant part of politics. It's just real people having real conversations about their life.
Most people in your life, you have a couple people that depend on you. If you're a boss or you're the leader of a company, you might have 100 people. Tom has over 250,000 people that might be able to come to you and say, and now obviously some are against you and some are for you, but that people need to remember that you're a man serving an incredibly vast group of people, and it's difficult enough to juggle the expectations of 10 people or 100 people. And now you have hundreds of thousands of people.
Yep, and they're all looking for, not all, but a large number of them have such skepticism of political figures because as a class of people,
stigma.
Like politicians and you know, political figures, elected officials have let people down so many times. And part of it is our own doing. Like part of it is just political figures who make really bad mistakes and affirm that expectation or bias that people have. The other part of it is people have false expectations of what's reasonably able to get done. You know, they want something to get done immediately and fix all these problems. And there's just so much in government that is so cumbersome and it's hard to break through and everything. And, you know, even within it, we do our best. There's like bureaucracy in the bureaucracy. There's bureaucracy in the legislature. Like there's just, it permeates everything. And so when we're not getting as much as we would like to get done, or I support an idea or a bill or a philosophy, but we don't have the votes to get it passed, so it just sits there and doesn't get done, and it looks like we're not doing anything. It's like, look, I would vote for this bill today, but we don't have the rest of the votes to get it done. So it's just going to sit there. And that's unfortunate because it looks like we're ignoring it. And we kind of are, but it's not for my part. It's the other, you know, other members that are elected by their constituents, you know. So there's a lot of that. But anytime political figures make mistakes, it just reaffirms that belief. And, you know, I just, like I said, I try and be myself, try and be authentic. I call it a candor versus pander. So a lot of people want to pander and get exactly 51% of people to agree with them on every single part of every single issue. I'm like, you know, I'm just going to have some candor, take it or leave it. I'm not for everybody. I have no desire to get 100% of the vote. Like Saddam Hussein would kill people in elections and still only got 97% of the vote. So like I have no expectation of getting anywhere near 100% of the vote. Instead, I want people to know what they're, you know, voting for and make an informed decision, and I rest easy on that. And like I said, I'm confident letting the voters of this district make that decision, and I have the utmost confidence in them.
100%. There's one quote that just went into my head and said, if you want to avoid criticism in this life, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing.
Absolutely.
It's not possible. So you have to be proud of who you are. You have to stand in your campaign, and you have to just, hey, that's all I can do. And if you want to support me, I'm glad to have you on the team. So the final bit I'd like to go into to wrap this podcast up, people that listen to this or listen to clips that are inspired by this, that want to help your campaign, that are like, listen, what can I do within my community, within my sphere of influence to help this man because I believe in the messaging that I'm hearing? What are the best things we can do? Because one of the parts you just talked about, referencing that billboard, WHMI actually wrote a hit piece on me when I had opened up against the governor's order. It was one of the most, like, Channel 4 was very objective. Jason Colthorpe, a strong liberal, was very in support of me making the decisions I did, and many other things. But my local community, WHMI, wrote one of the strongest hit pieces against me. And I remember it really hit hard because I was like, man, that is not the man that I am.
Right.
The messaging that they put out does not represent me as a person. Anyone that has ever known James Gray in this community and has seen my story over the years would say, you are objectively, irrefutably wrong on this. You're going to have smear campaigns come after you. You're going to have people that are going to try to bastardize you and try to demonize you and make you be the enemy. How do people that want to support you actually gain traction to getting your campaign to being victorious?
Yeah. Well, certainly they can talk to people in their community, right? This is all, I mean, I think that word of mouth, vouching for somebody or advocacy that you do carries a great deal with people because, you know, we're all kind of removed from the further you go in this political path, the more kind of removed you are because you're representing a larger and larger and larger community. So it's harder and harder to really make those one-to-one connections with more and more people. So that advocacy is huge. People can also go to our website, tombarrettforcongress.com. If they have capacity and they're comfortable with it, we could certainly use political contributions because we know that we're in this David versus Goliath funding differential. My opponent, you know, is frankly comes from one of the most elite families in Michigan. Her grandparents started Ballpark Franks. She went to she went to Cranbrook, the most elite private boarding school in the state that Mitt Romney attended while his dad was governor, and she's a graduate of that school into the Ivy League. She has these social affluent,
I understand.
That
she also has a different perspective on life than the average people.
She does. Yeah,
she's very disconnected from what a regular person wants or needs.
Right. And so to me, it's like, look, like I said, I'm just the Army grunt running for Congress. Nothing but I think we need maybe a few more Army grunts and a few less Ivy League, graduates. They can go to our website. There's a donate button on there. You can also email us. There's an email link on our website if you'd like to get involved, if you'd like a yard sign, if you'd like to go out and canvass with us. Anything that, folks can do. This is something that we're going to have to harness the grassroots of ordinary, hardworking, working class and middle class and folks that are just the fiber of our society that we need them to buy into. And I think they're ready for it. I really do. Just, when gas is unaffordably expensive, when groceries are, the highest price increase we've had in basically my lifetime, those are things that really cut ordinary Americans hard. And I think they're ready for a change. And that's what we're advocating for. And, I am who I am. I hope that, people see that in this interview. I love my family, I love my country, I love our state, and I love our community, and I want to just do my best to represent that and represent those values in Washington.
And I can say, without a doubt, I would always rather elect someone I know to be a great human being with a good track record than someone that maybe I would elect based on credentials or what school they graduated from or what their family legacy is. Those things don't matter to me. What matters to me is the character of the human being that I am going to elect because they are supposed to represent me. And if I'm a good man that wants a future for my family that I can be proud of, I have to select good people to fight for that future.
And if I'm not willing to if we're not willing to do it ourselves, we can't expect other people to do it. That's a big and as I was looking at this, I'm like, I could pass on this and say, you know what, Washington, D.C. is a long way from home. It's hard on a family. A campaign is difficult. We've got, someone that's going to outspend us and all these things. But if I'm not willing to do it, I can't expect other people to do it either. So I'm like, I'll try. I'm going to do my best. And here we are.
Well, you have my full support, and I hope that my influence and reach can reach a massive amount of people that know and respect me, that say, listen, if James is in full support of something, it's because he believes in it. I will never support something that I don't believe in. And shockingly, what you just said, this will be the first time my fighters and the people ever hear this on a podcast. I'm even considering getting into politics because if good people will not stand up and will not come together, then we are destined to be led wherever the other group would want us to go. So I am 100% in the fight with you. I appreciate
James, thank you.
I appreciate so much you coming to the studio today. It was an honor to sit and speak with you.
I had a great time.
So we'll wrap this
Even
episode.
Saw some old friends before we started, so that was great.
100%. Thank you very much, Tom, and best of luck with your campaign.
Thank you.